I want you to take a look at this image and I want you to tell me what you see. Do you see someone who you think is muscular? Do you see someone who you think is a pencil neck, who looks like they've never lifted before? Well, that's a picture of me, and I'm someone who gets criticized for how small I am. And so today I want to talk about a couple of things, all as it relates to the information and education space in the fitness industry. And I want to talk about three major things. One is genetics and how that plays a role in misinformation. The second is drugs and how that plays a role. And then the third, which is kind of a combination of the first two, is what this has done to people in general from a body dysmorphic perspective and how it's warped people's perception of fitness and muscle growth altogether. All right, so the first thing is genetics and the role that genetics seem to play. And I want to kind of make a comparison here because a lot of people seem to have a very difficult time grasping just how significant of a role genetics play in someone's physical appearance. Think about all of this genetic stuff in the context of something like sport, right? Imagine that you are back in your middle school shoes, right? And you are in gym class, or you are playing, football or soccer or whatever sport, or maybe you're interested in music, and so you're interested in playing the violin or singing, whatever it happens to be. It's very obvious to people, even the people themselves, the kids themselves, who is more or less genetically inclined for every given activity, right? There's the person in gym class who's literally running circles around all the other kids. Everyone wants to pick that kid, for their team. In music class, right? In chorus or something, there's the kid who sings, right? Think about your Justin Biebers of the world who are literally 10 years old and just explode in popularity because they have this voice of an angel. They've done zero training, they've had zero practice, and at the first time that they attempt to sing, they're just the best in the room. It's very obvious to people when genetics are playing a significant role, and yet when it comes to fitness and fitness information, all of this, it just remains as a kind of nebulous, like, oh, how much do genetics matter, or how little do they matter? Obviously, they matter a whole lot. They matter as much as anything could possibly matter in relation to the way that someone looks, in relation to the rate at which they gain muscle, in relation to the way in which they respond to any kind of drugs, in relation to how much effort they actually need to put into the various vectors of fitness and muscle growth to see the same response or better responses as other people, right? And this all creates a really massive problem in the fitness industry that actually doesn't exist in many other industries. So that problem is the problem of the appeal to physique fallacy, or at least that's what I call it, where basically our monkey brains are tuned such that whenever we see someone who maybe looks the way that we want to look, looks more muscular than we do, just as like, okay, that's the ideal physique that I want, right? We assume for some reason that that person must have the understanding to not only give me the advice so that I can get to where they are, but also the understanding that they actually understand how they got to where they are. I literally know people who have never trained calves in their lives who have bigger and more cool looking calves than I will probably ever have if I train for the next 40 years. Now, of course, none of this is to negate the fact that hard work and effort exists, and that in our own personal lives, we should largely ignore the whole genetic conversation in terms of how much effort we should put in and so on. So again, while it is truly possible that the most jacked person at your gym is genetically gifted and also has a really deep, awesome understanding of how resistance training operates, how programming works, the complex interaction between sleep and nutrition and recovery and all those other things, it is by far more the exception than the rule. And you would probably be very safe to assume that the jacked person you're looking at on social media has literally no idea what they're talking about. And if you don't believe that, or you just think it's a cope coming from a small biomechanics nerd and a pencil neck, well, you should probably think about where that is actually emerging from. Is that emerging from somewhere logical, or is it coming from pure emotion? Okay, so that's category number one and problem number one, which is the genetic component of things, where people can look a certain way, they get listened to because they look a certain way, even if their information is totally bogus, which it is 95+% of the time. But then there's this whole second component, which is, problematic in all sorts of other ways, which is this drug drug component, right? Which obviously overlaps with the genetic component because someone's response to drugs is largely genetically driven, right? If, person A takes a dose that is 1 unit and person B takes a dose that is 5 units, those two people might get the exact same response, and yet person 1 took 20% of the dose. So while genetics ultimately set the trajectory that someone is on, anyone with enough financial freedom now can access any kind of drug pretty much that they want, and within a matter of months look much better than most natural lifters who have been lifting for years and years and years on end, just trying to attempt to put on 1 pound of muscle per year. If you're someone for whatever reason who thinks that drugs aren't as powerful as they are, or that drugs don't influence someone's physique as much as they do, take a look at this study where they basically had 43 participants. They divided them into 4 different groups. They had 2 placebo groups and 2 drug groups. And the 2 groups I want to focus on are the placebo plus exercise group versus the drug plus no exercise group. In other words, these researchers compared natural people who were exercising, who had a solid weight training program, to people who were literally sitting on the couch doing nothing, but who took testosterone every week, something like 600 milligrams of testosterone enanthate. And after 10 weeks, they basically measured muscle growth response. And those who took the testosterone, who did not do any exercise, any lifting at all, outgrew the group who were natural but lifted by 50%. And then get this, the group who lifted and took drugs grew 300% more muscle than the group who didn't take drugs, who lifted naturally. Now, you might think that all of this is kind of bogus, and you're like, Ben, what's the big deal? People can do whatever they want. I agree, people can do whatever they want. But when you exist in a world of social media, which is our current world, there are many, many, many different problems that arise downstream of this phenomenon. So the first and kind of biggest thing is that the fitness advice that someone gives to another person has a direct impact on their experience of exercise and also the way that they view their bodies. So just as, a simple example, it's like if some jack dude on the internet is giving you some bogus advice about how to target XYZ muscle, and they say, hey, do this thing, and you do that thing, and you don't feel that muscle, what are you gonna be led to believe? Are you gonna be led to believe that the jack dude who apparently knows what they're talking about was wrong? Or are you gonna think that there was something wrong with your body? I've had conversations with so many people who for years think that there is something broken about them. They're discouraged, they're disheartened, they're in pain, they're not enjoying their lifting experience, and they're not enjoying anything related to exercise because they're listening to people who have no fucking clue what they're talking about, who feel entitled to give other people advice on the internet because they took drugs, had good genetics, and looked a certain way. And if you don't think that that is bad, if you don't think that that is a bad outcome, that a person can have that experience because of this information landscape we're existing in, because of these appeal to physique fallacies, then I'm not really sure that you know what the word bad even means. Now there's, again, the second part of this, which is kind of just people's overall view of their bodies, and just the fact that so many people, even if they're consciously aware of it, right? Even someone like me who's constantly on social media seeing other people's physiques, I'm aware of all of these things. And yet in the moment when I see, the latest and greatest half natty influencer, I'm basically looking at someone who I'm like, damn, like I wish I could look like that. I'm like, what am I doing with my, time training? I'm training in the gym 8 to 10 hours a week, and like this is the physique that I have relative to this other person. These kinds of people, they are the norm. And anyone who has a relatively well-developed natural muscular physique is now actually automatically deemed as someone who should not be listened to by a lot of people. People who, like myself, have spent years growing and gaining muscle and who actually look much, much more muscular compared to when they started lifting, but who don't look half as good as the person who took drugs for a year. Normal people's expectations about what is possible and about what they should expect to achieve in the gym are completely and utterly delusional, right? People left and right literally have veins popping out of their ass cheeks, and as a consequence, anyone who doesn't look like that is basically just pushed to the side and dismissed as someone who shouldn't be listened to or shouldn't be trusted because they don't look like The Rock. And speaking from personal experience, and I think I can speak for a lot of young men when I say this, a lot of young men get into fitness intensely and lifting intensely because of these body dysmorphic drives. And it was literally only up until the last, year or two that I actually felt like I began to conceptualize all this stuff and to begin to be more comfortable in my own skin with the way that I look. Okay, so all of this is a problem. The appeal to physique, the lack of understanding of how big a role genetics play, all that is a disaster. But as always, I want to be someone who provides a navigation route to this mess. I want to be someone who doesn't just complain about these things, but provides actionable solutions. So when you are evaluating the fitness content that you are consuming, here's a set of things that I would recommend that you do. Number one, does the person who's speaking clearly explain a bunch of things that they're talking about without excessive jargon, right? Without saying a bunch of words that sound fancy to sound fancy. If someone can't explain something in a sort of confident seeming way, in a way that's like, oh, this person is actually authentically speaking, and in a way where they're using simple terms, they likely don't understand the topic. Then ask yourself, do they handle any kind of nuance? Do they delve into any greater depth? Or do they sort of stay at the level of very, very simple? This might seem like a contradictory question to the first, but it's actually not, right? You can be very in-depth and nuanced while still not using over jargony terms. So if they don't go beyond this very surface level explanation, you should probably bring that into question, right? Depth essentially represents a kind of expertise. Now, this one is a really important one in my estimation. Do they admit to not knowing everything, right? Or are they someone who just across all contexts, across all questions, across all conversations, seems absolutely confident and certain about everything that they espouse, and they never admit to prior times in which they were found to be wrong? Admission of being wrong is a superpower, in my opinion. It's something that not only represents someone's authenticity and someone's vulnerability and humility, but it also lets you know that, like, hey, this is a person who is going to constantly be course correcting. This is a person that I can trust, and this is a person that I can actually listen to for the foreseeable future. Now, I want to make one thing abundantly clear, which is that none of this conversation means that there aren't drug-using, genetically gifted people who know what they're talking about. There are plenty of these people out there. In fact, one of them is a very, very, very close friend of mine who competes in the IFBB. And he's so intelligent and he's so measured with his thinking and honest and authentic. And fortunately, but unfortunately, that's what makes him an exception, is he's a huge jack dude who really has a high degree of intellect and nuance in his thinking. So these individuals do exist, but in my experience, they are incredibly rare to come by. And ultimately, I have no problem with people doing whatever they're going to do as long as they're open, honest, and clearly communicative about, you know, what they're doing in terms of how they've made their progress and whether or not that has come from sort of natural just effort and genetics as a combination, or whether it's come from some other kind of help. So my goals are really to move this whole fitness education space away from everything that is so physique focused in the way that it currently is. It's not to say that you shouldn't want to look better. I want to look better. Most people want to look better. Most people want to grow muscle to accomplish that goal. But if you find that the person that you've been listening to for a while is someone who you just appreciate looking at and kind of weirdly enjoy feeling bad while looking at, you should probably redistribute your attention to people who are actually helping you in practical application. So with every influencer, every educator that you listen to, ask yourself that honest question. How has this person helped me? Is this person making a positive impact on me? Or every time I look at them, do I feel like shit and they're not actually providing any real help or education? And ultimately, as I've mentioned many, many different times on this channel before, my goal with all of you and helping all of you is not just to show you the what, but also the how, right? How to think through problems, how to actually improve your ability to think about these things rather than to sort of just blindly accept answers. So I hope you all will join me in this attempt to bring fitness education to a place of sanity and of clear, honest, open dialogue, of humble communication.